Welcome back to Fast Politics, Ali Vitali.
Thrilled to be back here, Molly Jong-Fast.
It's so fun to have you on my podcast because I feel like worlds collide, you know?
Yeah, when MJ becomes the podcast, it's great.
It's, it's all one mushy banana republic. Can you explain to us where we are? The House has gone home like about a week early because why wouldn't they? And I mean, really, it's because Mike Johnson has no idea how his members are going to vote, right?
It's because the Epstein bus that they drove and created is about to now run them over. And it manifested in Congress, I think, in a really fascinating way because it ground the entire House to a halt. Now, the dirty little secret
Mhm.
here is that as much as they got out of town early, it's not like they have this massive list of to-dos that they didn't get done. But really, what
Mhm.
happened is more of a commentary on the balancing act that the speaker has to do here between his members who know that they've talked to their constituents for
Mhm.
years about Epstein and the White House, who also talked to their constituents about Epstein for years, but now do not want to be
Right.
compelled to release these documents. And that was
Right.
the balancing act on display for the speaker, and ultimately why he had to send his members home early.
That's right. And I would love to get into something a little bit nerdy as opposed to what we do, which is get into stuff which is very nerdy. So we are sort of barreling towards a government shutdown, which is the kind of backdrop of all of this. Republicans have passed this BBB, then they passed a rescission package where they did funding for PEPFAR, but also took money away from PBS because it's important if you're going to do one good thing to do lots of other bad stuff while you're in there. And a lot of the PBS that's being punished, which I feel like is such a Trump thing, is like the PBS that's being punished is not the big PBS, right? I mean, they're going to lose a little funding, but they'll survive. It's more going to be the like tribal radio stations in Oklahoma. So talk to us about how I just want because I'm setting it up for what I want to talk about next. Can you explain to us why this rescission package was passed and a little bit about how unusual it is?
Yeah, so I actually did an explainer video of this on Instagram of like what it means
Perfect.
to do rescissions because it's one of those Washington words that's a buzzword that I think people's eyes glaze over and it's like meant to exclude people from understanding the process. And so basically
Hmm.
what they did here through a rescissions package is yes, they have done these before. It usually happens at the end of a fiscal year when you're about to redo the budget or do a continuing resolution that just kind of keeps funding levels the same. Typically people look and they say, oh, well, there's $80 million left over that this one agency didn't use. So we'll claw that back. That'll go back into
Right.
the pot. What was weird about this rescissions package and why it matters so much going forward is because rescissions is a partisan mechanism. You can do it with just one party, as Republicans did, to take back funds that both parties agreed to fund and appropriate in the first place. And so the reason that rescissions at this juncture is so important is because they did it in partisan fashion. Republicans, for the first time ever, midstream of a fiscal year, clawed back funds that Congress had already appropriated, but they did it during budget season, mere weeks before both parties are supposed to come back together and bipartisanly negotiate another fiscal year package. So Democrats are now left in the position of saying, all right, we negotiated in bipartisan fashion, as we always do in good faith, to keep the government open, to fund various government programs. And then y'all did an end run that took out
Right.
everything that we wanted and negotiated for in that process to begin with.
Hmm.
So, what is
Yeah.
the incentive then for Democrats to come back to the table in September and say, okay, we're going to negotiate in good faith like everything's fine?
Right.
And oh, by the way, the OMB chief, Russ Vought, who was one of the key people pushing that first rescissions package, in the interim period has said, I actually think that Congress's bipartisan funding processes should be way less bipartisan. And so that just gives Democrats even more of a reason to, if not question, then outright completely doubt that they should be at the negotiating table for this, which just meant that the odds of a government shutdown went way up.
And Russ Vought, architect of Project 2025, wrote a bunch of it, and also is this sort of in Trump 1.0 experimented with impoundment. Impoundment is the thing that the Nixon White House did. It's very sketchy. It's basically Congress puts money towards something and the president says, no, we're not going to do it.
So the way that
Right?
I explained this too, again, like in my little Instagram explainer, is like imagine you, me, and 10 of our friends go on vacation. We all put money, we decide to put money in the pot to go to dinner every night. And then one person of us convinces all of us that that money that we said should go to dinner every night actually is just going to get clawed right on back. And some of us are mad and some of us are happy, but it's getting clawed back regardless. And so you're in this position then where everyone is still on the vacation, but that money back in the pot is now living somewhere else that doesn't go to dinner, but all of us still have to eat. So where does that then leave you? And the mechanism is based in law. This is not something that the
Right.
administration is just doing, but it's a law that is not often used and not in this way. And that's what
Right.
turns this on its head.
And I think we see a lot of times in the Trump administration them using zombie laws to do crazy stuff. Like I've written about this a lot. Like the Comstock Act wasn't meant for methylpristone, or it was in the 1800s, right?
Yeah.
The Posse Comitatus
The Comitatus,
Act
yeah.
was that alien enemies wasn't meant for that. Like just a lot of times these laws that were never repealed because no one ever thought they'd use them. Now you had this sort of Federalist Society crew put together a new way of using these laws.
But this also strikes me. I remember when states like Arizona or Michigan, in the aftermath of Dobbs, repealed
Right.
laws from their books that are from the 1800s that
Mhm.
limited abortion. And I remember some casual political viewers saying to me, well, what's the point? We're not there anymore. It's not like they're going to use them. Here we are now, and you realize why Democratic groups did the work of making sure that they were closing loopholes that could otherwise be exploited. Because I think you're right. And, when you start talking about procedures for doing things that are literally Latin, they're old. But then that Posse Comitatus Act about like how federal troops can be moved into states.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
lawmakers were then immediately coming on my show and saying, but this is even more reason for us to have to reform the process. And so, what we've seen with Trump time and again, and I think about the Electoral Count Act, the Reform Act that they did about 3 years
Right.
ago between the
Right.
Senate and the House in bipartisan fashion,
Which
like
they
Trump,
had to do
because of the
because
way that Trump
yeah,
tried
because it
to,
was a loophole. Yeah.
yes, exploit the process of what a vice president can and can't do, as well as some other things at the state level. Like, we've seen Trump continuously try to press through these loopholes and force the other institutions of government to legislate around them to patch them up. And this is the problem with a Congress that has been completely remade in Trump's image and is held as a majority just by one party, is that
Right.
there is no impetus then or motivation to close the loopholes.
Right. If anything, they wanna open loopholes. I wanna, like, pull this to something else, which is that after 9/11, we put in place all of these emergency powers, the Bush administration, and look, everyone was very freaked out, and there was a
Yeah.
feeling it was very these emergency powers were actually quite popular. That's how he was able to put them in place. And as someone who lived in New York during 9/11, I know why, because people were really scared, and they were
Yeah.
willing to give up their civil liberties because they were scared, and they wanted to be safe, and they felt that was the only way to make the government safe. But what happened is a lot of those emergency powers are still in the books. So it's 20 years later, and the government has way more power than it did in 2001, August of 2001. So it does strike me that there really is, if American democracy continues on, which we hope it will, and we have midterms, that there will really be a kind of, there's going to have to eventually be some kind of reckoning here, or we're completely screwed.
Yeah. So, I mean, but those are the stakes, right?
Right.
I think about Congress and the ways that this building was, I think, in many ways, just built on the etiquette of
Yeah.
governing in small d democratic fashion, which meant
Mhm.
bipartisan compromise and the common idea that if everyone was walking away from the table unhappy, but with something, that was normal. And Trump's Washington and other Washingtons have exploited this too. That's not to say that Republicans
Right.
are the first people to take advantage of having both houses of power in Congress and the White House. Certainly, that's how we got the Affordable Care Act and other
Right.
mass pieces of legislation. It's just the motivation points are different. And
Yeah.
Trump's is the first administration willing to not just exploit the loopholes, go full force on having majorities in the places that you need them, but then also bowl over all of the cultural and etiquette norms that typically govern Washington. And
Right.
that's why it feels like it's so out of control and without checks, because
Yes.
that's no longer part of the permission structure here.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
anything,
No.
it's knocked down. And if you were to embrace bipartisanship, someone like Tom Tillis, for example, who's like, hey, I just got some questions, whether it's about the
Right.
Hegseth nomination or about the rescissions package or whatever, like you're ostracized from the party and ultimately have to make the choice not to run for reelection, right? So like
Yeah.
it's a full party apparatus that now just supports administration that is a feature, not a bug of it, is to test all of the limits in culture, in media,
Yeah.
in Washington, in policymaking, in funding, in all of these different arenas.
It does feel like all the guardrails that we had in the first Trump administration have been systematically just focused on and attacked and decimated. So, for example, while we have the CBS stuff, which I think is really important, so people listen to this podcast on Saturday morning. Thank you for listening.
Love it.
And on Thursday, we saw that the Trump FCC
Mhm.
approved the Skydance murder. That is conveniently right after the cancellation of Colbert.
It was an interesting week of timing. I mean, that's final approval on that big merger, right? That has long been talked
Right.
about as the motivation for CBS settling a lawsuit with Trump. That had it gone to trial, I mean, the First Amendment right to edit an interview where the meaning wasn't fundamentally changed anyway is so central, and every news organization does this in print or on television. And so again, like the dubious nature of that lawsuit to begin with is central here. But the fact that this merger went through a week after Colbert, I do think the part of this that sort of runs counter is the way that we've seen Colbert, but also The Daily Show and now South Park be unflinching in their criticism, not just of the president, but of this deal that their parent company has done is a bright spot, I think. And as someone who sort of came into a love of news through a love of satirical news, I so
Mhm.
appreciate what this little bastion of our industry is doing here, because it's reminding people that there is a moral code. And for
Yeah.
someone like South Park, for Matt Stone and Trey Parker, who just got a $1.5 billion deal for more episodes, and to come in
Yeah.
with the season premiere that they came in with, my jaw was on the floor the
Yeah.
entire time. The way
It
that, as a longtime South Park watcher, they are now depicting the president of the United States in the way that they depicted the former president of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, laying in bed with
yeah.
is
Yeah.
so jarring and so flooring and such a commentary on the times. But they are equal opportunity critics.
Oh, yeah.
And
They're
so the fact that Trump thinks he's
libertarians.
special
Yeah.
because they're going after him is not, they're missing the point.
No. Yeah. No, they hated Bush too. I mean, what's so interesting though is you have so much of Trumpism is this very kind of one-dimensional, protect the leader. He doesn't like to be made fun of. He really doesn't like it, right? He remember there was I think when they start off with the portrait in the capital of Colorado,
Yeah.
he hated a portrait and he made them change it because he didn't like it, because he didn't like the way he was depicted. So there's so many of these like very kind of kitschy, almost Mussolini-esque kind of tropes that are from other times, and to watch this be exploited, I mean, I was watching it and I was like, "Oh my god, Trump's gonna send them to CCOT."
I don't think I went quite that far, but I knew
But,
there was gonna be some kind of a conniption, and I'm frankly surprised we
yeah,
haven't seen more of a reaction. But if they've got 49 more of those public service announcements like they aired at the end of that program, I'm like,
yeah.
I don't even know what we could be in for.
It's interesting to me because so much of what happened in this 24 election and even in the 2016 election that worked for Trump was he got in the culture and the culture was downstream of the politics, right? So you got the Milk Boys and Joe Rogan and people who were leading the culture. And his obsession with cable news was always his obsession with, like, if you get in the culture, you can get in the
Drive the
bloodstream, you
zeitgeist.
can win office. Yeah,
Yeah, it's been so central. And so I actually to bring this conversation into straight connection with the story that we have only been talking about here in Washington, which is Jeffrey Epstein, like I would put the Epstein story, if I were to put it in a column, under like the entertainment culture aspect, right?
yeah,
It's a legal story, but like it's not a
for sure.
politics story. It has political
No.
tangents, but like it is a culture story. It is a story
Yeah.
about a country that mistrusts institutions. And my first assignment
Mm,
in politics was covering the first Trump campaign, right? His central grievance was as an outsider who wanted to bring transparency and wipe out the swamp and he was that crusader for the everyman. And I think that the awareness that the Epstein saga has brought to the larger political population is like the guy who was masquerading as an everyman is not. And also, he's protecting all of the other non everymen who are part of
right.
this Epstein episode. And so I think that's why this story has stuck around for so long because it was like the central current that Trump ran on from the very beginning
Yeah.
was grievance against the machine, the establishment,
Mhm.
the institutions. And now it's always been clear, but like it's extra clear, I think, even to MAGA, that you cannot be an outsider still and be president of the United States. You probably weren't even an outsider when you were just a very wealthy reality TV real estate guy. But like now it's much more out in the open.
And I wonder if the cardinal sin of Epstein is obviously the many, many victims, and I thought Lawrence did a really great episode on where they read about that where you just heard it and you were like, "Oh my god," because the sort of fundamentals of these 14-year-old girls aging out at 18, like, that is just horrific. But I wondered if the thing that his base is so stuck on is the idea that this really shows without a doubt that he was in a world with Bill Clinton, with with all of these academics, with all these people who he said he was not in the world with. Like, it's not just the exposure of possible stuff with children, which is horrendous, but it's really this idea there's so many pictures of them at parties, at clubs, it's like, here I am, I'm gonna bring it down, and also here I am in a photo.
Yeah, and proximity is not criminal, right?
Right. No
And
question.
and Bill Clinton has put out a statement about
Right.
that. I mean, we've seen multiple iterations of that.
Right.
And that's true for Trump too.
Right.
But
Right.
it
For
is
sure.
embarrassing and it does
Yes.
come at a societal and cost of respect. And for
Right.
Trump, that respect is such a central currency. It was in large part the motivation that he had for running for office and then
Yeah.
bringing the Republican Party to heel, and then trying to bend culture to his will, right? So, like, it's always been a very central thought process and lens,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think you're right that we're not talking about the embarrassment cost, and it ties back to what you were talking about when we were discussing South Park, right? If he doesn't like the portrayal, portrait or figurative otherwise,
Yeah.
that's a problem for him.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think that's the bow that ties all of these seemingly disparate threads together. Um,
Yeah.
and it connects back to the MAGA base that, we were talking this morning on Morning Joe about the idea that this is a base that has stayed together under the banner of Trump. It has really been a cult of personality.
For
And
9
he
years.
and he himself has been the unifier. But
Yeah.
it's about to splinter because
Yeah.
he is no longer going to be on ballots, and MAGA is gonna have to find a new standard bearer, and already there's a dozen people who are vying for that quietly, privately, and out of the limelight.
Yeah. Ali Vitali, so smart. I feel smarter after this
I
conversation.
feel
I know
smarter always talking to you.